The Galactic Survival Academy occupied an entire moon orbiting the trade hub of Nexus Prime, which said something profound about the state of spacefaring civilization. When you needed a whole celestial body to teach people how not to die on planets, you had perhaps strayed too far from your evolutionary roots. The Academy prided itself on producing graduates who could survive exactly 72 hours on any classified habitable world, provided they had their standard issue survival pack, their emergency beacon, their atmospheric analyzer, their water purification tablet dispenser, their thermal regulation bodysuit, and approximately 15 other pieces of equipment that would make any self-respecting ancient human laugh themselves into an early grave. The curriculum was exhaustive: 17 different courses on equipment maintenance, 32 modules on reading digital survival readouts, an entire semester dedicated to the proper unpacking sequence of emergency shelters. What the curriculum did not include, notably, was any actual skill that didn't require technology more advanced than a pointy stick. This was fine for the vast majority of species in the known galaxy, who had collectively decided somewhere around the invention of the warp drive that knowing how to start a fire or identify edible plants was about as useful as memorizing the atomic weight of every element. They had apps for that sort of thing. Well, not apps for starting fires, because who needed fire when you had thermal regulators? The very concept was absurd. The Academy's motto, carved in 16 languages across its entrance hall, read, "Preparation prevents perishing." They were extremely proud of the alliteration, less proud of their 73% pass rate, but that was considered acceptable given the rigorous standards. The final exam was legendarily difficult. Survive 3 days on a randomly selected world with only your training and your issued equipment. Simple in theory. In practice, most failures came from cadets who couldn't remember if the blue button or the green button activated the water purifier. The mortality rate was thankfully low since instructors monitored everything from orbit and could extract the cadets before they actually died of their own incompetence, but the psychological scars of almost dying because you couldn't work a Nutri-Pack seal were reportedly significant. This particular training cycle had produced an interesting final exam squad. Team Verdant 7, named for their assigned survival planet, consisted of 4 cadets from 4 different species, which the Academy loved because it demonstrated their commitment to diversity and also made for excellent promotional materials. Leading the team was Crixnack, a Kralix whose species had evolved from pack hunters on a desert world and now primarily hunted good investment opportunities in galactic markets. Crixnack had prepared for this exam with the intensity of someone preparing for war. He had created spreadsheets, color-coded spreadsheets. His survival plan included contingencies for his contingencies, all timed down to the minute. He had lost sleep over the optimal configuration of their equipment loadout. He wore his academy uniform with military precision, despite the fact that the Kralix had eliminated their military 3 centuries ago in favor of strongly worded economic sanctions. The team's technical specialist was Vixril, a Vexian whose crystalline structure made her look like a very judgmental chandelier. The Vexians had evolved in cave systems where bioluminescence was the primary light source, then discovered electricity and never looked back. Vixril treated technology with the reverence most species reserved for religious artifacts. She had named her multi-tool. She whispered encouragement to the equipment scanner. She had strong opinions about proper gear maintenance that she shared frequently and at length, whether anyone asked or not. Their medic was a Quilarian named Thuperex, from a species that looked like someone had tried to draw an octopus from memory while very tired. The Quilarians were famous hypochondriacs who had invented 60% of known medical scanning technology purely from anxiety. Thuparex carried enough medical supplies to stock a small clinic and had disinfected his tentacles 4 times during the shuttle ride to the drop zone. He viewed all planets as essentially biological warfare waiting to happen, and approached nature with the enthusiasm of someone approaching a waste reclamation facility. And then there was the human. His name was Marcus Chen, and he had shown up to the final exam with a knife, a metal water bottle, and the kind of confidence that made the other cadets deeply uncomfortable. While they had checked and rechecked their equipment, he had taken a nap. While they reviewed survival protocols, he whittled a piece of wood into something that might have been a duck or possibly a very optimistic fish. When Crixnuck distributed the 70-page survival plan binder he had printed, Marcus had thanked him politely and used it to sit on during the shuttle ride because the seats were uncomfortable. Humans had only joined the galactic community 40 years ago, and the prevailing opinion was that they were either brilliantly insane or insanely brilliant, with most evidence pointing toward both. They had showed up in a ship held together with what they called duct tape, and sheer determination, introduced themselves by accidentally insulting 3 different species' religious leaders, and then made it up by sharing something called whiskey and pizza. Their homeworld was classified as a death world, which they found hilarious. Their idea of recreation included jumping out of flying vehicles for fun and climbing mountains that didn't need climbing. The Academy had only started accepting human cadets 5 years ago and was still trying to figure out how to grade them, since they kept doing things that technically violated protocols while producing objectively good results. The drop went perfectly, which should have been the first warning sign. The shuttle deposited Team Verdant 7 in a temperate river valley on Verdis 7, a planet so generically pleasant it was essentially the galactic equivalent of a stock photo. Breathable atmosphere, moderate temperature, plenty of water, abundant vegetation, and absolutely nothing that wanted to eat them. It was as close to a guaranteed pass as the Academy offered, which meant the real challenge was not panicking and forgetting how to open the equipment containers. Crixnuck had already begun implementing Phase 1 of his survival plan, which involved establishing a perimeter, when the universe decided to demonstrate its sense of humor. The equipment drop, which was supposed to land in a nice flat clearing, instead got caught by an unexpected wind shear. The cargo pod sailed gracefully over their heads, struck a rock outcropping with impressive force, and tumbled down into a ravine with a series of crashes that sounded expensive. For a moment, nobody moved. They stood there in the pleasant valley, listening to the gentle burble of the river and the distant clatter of their survival equipment, achieving terminal velocity against various geological features. "That's fine," Crixnuck said, his voice tight. "That's fine. Equipment pods are built to withstand impacts. It's in the specifications, page 47, section 12, subsection C." They scrambled down to the ravine. The equipment pod had indeed withstood the impact, in the sense that it still technically existed as a discrete object. However, its contents had not fared as well. Nutripacks had exploded across the rocks like someone had murdered a very boring rainbow. The water purification system was now several water purification systems, none of them functional. The shelter assembly had disassembled itself permanently. The emergency beacon blinked weakly once, sparked and gave up on life entirely. "This is fine," Crixnuck repeated, his voice now several octaves higher. "This is fine, we can adapt. The plan can be modified. We just need to prioritize and reorganize, and we're going to die," Vixrel announced with crystalline certainty. "We're going to die on this planet, because the equipment is destroyed, and we can't survive without equipment. That's how survival works. The equipment helps you survive. No equipment means no survival. The logic is inescapable. We need to sterilize the area. Tuprix added, tentacles writhing in distress. All this dirt and water and plant matter is contaminated with local microorganisms. We can't eat anything here. We can't drink anything here. We're going to die of either starvation or infection. Possibly both. Can you die of both simultaneously? I should scan for that. Marcus had walked away from the disaster site and was standing by the river, hands in his pockets, looking around with the casual interest of someone touring a garden rather than facing potential death. The river was clear and fast-moving, with a rocky bottom visible through the water. Trees lined both banks, some kind of local equivalent that looked similar enough to earth varieties. The sun was warm. Birds, or bird equivalents, were singing. "Hey," Marcus called back to the others. "This is actually a pretty nice spot." A nice spot. Vixril's voice achieved a pitch that could probably cut glass. "Our survival equipment is destroyed. We have no food, no shelter, no way to purify water. And you think this is nice?" Marcus shrugged. "I mean, yeah, good water source, plenty of firewood, decent fishing by the looks of it. We'll be fine." "Fine?" Crixnark had pulled out his survival manual and was flipping through it frantically. "There's no protocol for this. Chapter 15 covers equipment loss, but assumes you still have the emergency backup equipment, which we don't because it was in the same pod. We need to activate the emergency beacon, except that's also destroyed. We need to eat lunch," Marcus interrupted. "We should probably eat lunch. I'm hungry. You guys hungry?" 3 sets of alien eyes stared at him with varying expressions of disbelief. "Hungry?" Thuperix repeated. "How can you think about food at a time like this?" "We don't have food. The Nutri-Packs are destroyed." "Right, so we'll make food." Marcus started rolling up his sleeves. "Give me like 30 minutes. "Make food," Vixril said flatly. "You're going to make food. From what? Are you going to manifest nutrients from the quantum foam? Do humans have replication technology you haven't shared with the rest of us?" "Nah, I'm just gonna cook some stuff." Marcus was already walking along the riverbank, examining the ground. "There's fish in this river. I can see them. Some of these plants look edible. We've got fire, water, heat source. Basic cooking setup. No problem." "Fire." All 3 aliens spoke in unison, their voices harmonizing in horror. "You can't use uncontrolled combustion." Crixnark looked genuinely scandalized. "That's a level 1 violation of Academy safety protocols. Fire produces smoke and heat signatures and carbon particulates and cooked food." "Yeah." Marcus had found what he was looking for and was gathering flat rocks from the riverside. "Look, you guys can stand around panicking if you want, but I'm gonna eat. Feel free to join me once you're done freaking out." The alien cadets watched in stunned silence as the human began arranging rocks in a circle. Then he gathered dry wood from under the trees, stripped bark from fallen branches, and collected what looked like dried grass. His movements were efficient, practiced, like he had done this 1,000 times before. Which, being human, he probably had, because humans were inexplicably nostalgic for the time when they lived in caves and hit things with rocks. "He's actually going to do it," Vixril whispered. "He's going to create an exothermic oxidation reaction for food preparation purposes. This is insane. Should we stop him?" Thuperix asked, though none of his tentacles moved to actually intervene. "How?" Crixnark had given up on his manual and was now simply staring. "How is he going to ignite the combustible material? He doesn't have an ignition device. Unless, does he have an ignition device? Did he smuggle prohibited equipment?" Marcus pulled out his knife, found a specific type of rock, and began striking them together over a small pile of dried grass and bark shavings. Sparks flew. On the third try, a spark caught. He bent down, cupped his hands around the tiny ember, and blew gently. Smoke appeared, then a small flame. He carefully fed it with progressively larger pieces of tinder until he had an actual fire burning in his rock circle. "Oh my stars," Tuperix breathed. "He created fire with rocks and metal. That's primitive," Vixril finished. "That's extremely primitive." "That's awesome," Crixnark corrected, despite himself. Marcus built up the fire until it was producing good coals, then created a flat cooking surface by balancing several smooth rocks across the fire pit. He took green branches from the trees, stripped them, and made a rough grill structure. While that was heating up, he waded into the river in his boots, completely unconcerned about wet feet or proper hydration protocol or any of the 17 rules about water contact. The Academy had drilled into them. "What's he doing now?" Vixril asked. I think he's hunting," Crixnark said slowly. "Without tools, is he going to catch a fish with his hands? Can humans do that?" "Apparently yes." Marcus stood very still in the water, then suddenly lunged forward, hands darting into the river. He came up with a thrashing fish, which he dispatched quickly with his knife and tossed onto the bank. Then he caught another, and another. Within 10 minutes, he had 5 fish laid out on the grass. "Those are unprocessed biological organisms," Tuperix said weakly. "They could contain any number of harmful proteins or toxins or parasites or... they're fish," Marcus called back, apparently having excellent hearing. "They're fine. Your species eats stuff that's chemically similar to bleach, and you're worried about a fish." While the aliens processed that, Marcus began preparing his catch. He cleaned the fish with efficient knife work, rinsed them in the river, and then started gathering plants. He found something that looked like wild onions, herbs that smelled aromatic when crushed, and some kind of local citrus equivalent growing on a low bush. "He's foraging," Crixnark said, consulting his manual desperately. "That's in Chapter 23, but it requires a botanical database and chemical analyzer to identify safe consumption items. He doesn't have either. He's just looking at them and deciding." "Humans have apparently maintained pattern recognition for edible vegetation," Vixril observed. "That's such an inefficient use of neural capacity when databases exist." "Yeah, but databases need power," Crixnark countered. "His brain just works, all the time, for free." Marcus had returned to his cooking setup, which now looked less like random rocks and more like an actual outdoor kitchen. The fire had burned down to perfect coals. The flat rocks were radiating heat. The improvised grill was ready. He laid the fish on the hot rocks, added his foraged herbs, squeezed the citrus over them, and the smell that arose made all 3 aliens involuntarily step closer. "What is that scent?" Tuperix asked, his sanitation concerns temporarily forgotten. "That's cooking food," Marcus said cheerfully. "Real food, made with actual heat and ingredients and seasoning. You know, the way food was prepared for thousands of years before someone decided bland nutrient paste was the peak of culinary achievement." He flipped the fish with a flat stick he had shaped. Fat sizzled on the hot rocks. Smoke carried the smell of herbs and citrus and cooking protein across the riverside. Marcus had even found large leaves to use as plates, which he arranged with the care of someone who actually cared about presentation. "The flesh is changing color and texture due to protein denaturation from thermal energy," Vixril observed. leaning in. The Maillard reaction is creating complex flavor compounds. I've read about this but never witnessed it. It's so inefficient. It's beautiful, Crixnark corrected. His survival manual lay forgotten on the ground. It might be contaminated, Tuprex added, but he was already extending a tentacle hopefully. Marcus finished cooking and arranged 5 portions on his leaf plates. The fish were perfectly done, flaky and moist, surrounded by the cooked vegetables and herbs. It looked like something from a restaurant, not something made with rocks and river water in the middle of a survival exam. Lunch is served, Marcus announced. Come and get it before it gets cold. The aliens approached, like they were approaching a religious altar. Marcus handed each of them a leaf plate loaded with food. They stared at it. The smell alone was making them produce excess saliva, or whatever the equivalent was for their species. Are we sure this is safe? Thuprex asked, already raising it toward his mouth equivalent. You scan it if you want, Marcus said around a mouthful of fish. I'm eating. Crixnark took the first bite. His eyes widened. He took another bite immediately, then another. Within 30 seconds, he was devouring the fish like he had never eaten before in his life. This is incredible, he managed between bites. How is this so good? Nutri-Packs have optimal nutritional balance, and this is just random biological matter, but it tastes like actual food, Marcus suggested. Vixeril had started eating too, her crystalline structure somehow vibrating with pleasure. The texture, the varied flavors, the thermal gradient between the exterior crust and interior moisture. This is more complex than anything I've consumed from standard rations. Even Thuprex, who had run his medical scanner over his portion 3 times, was eating with evident joy. I'm detecting elevated dopamine analogs in my system. This food is producing a pleasure response beyond simple nutritional satisfaction. How did we forget about this? How did an entire galactic civilization forget that food could be enjoyable? Marcus finished his portion and started making more. The aliens had eaten theirs so fast, he was pretty sure they hadn't even tasted the first few bites. He grilled more fish, roasted some of the tubers he had found, and even made a rough salad from edible leaves. The aliens watched his every movement, like students witnessing a master class. Can you teach us this? Crixnark asked suddenly. This food-making process, can it be learned? Cooking? Sure. It's not that hard once you know the basics. Fire plus food plus time plus seasoning. That's the foundation. Everything else is just variations. Marcus flipped another fish. Though I gotta say, it's wild that you guys have faster than light travel, but forgot how to cook a fish. We didn't forget, Vixeril said defensively. We transcended the need for such primitive methods. We optimized. We improved. You made everything taste like cardboard and called it improvement. Marcus countered. Don't get me wrong. Nutrient packs are great for space travel, but if you can have actual food, why wouldn't you? Efficiency, Crixnark said, but he sounded uncertain. Time management, nutritional precision, boredom, joylessness. Forgetting that eating is one of life's basic pleasures, Marcus added. He handed over the second round of food. Look, I get it. Technology is great. I love technology. But some things don't need improving. Fire worked for cooking 100,000 years ago. It works now. Sometimes the old ways are old because they're good, not because they're obsolete. They ate in silence for a while, sitting by the river with a warm fire and full bellies, and the slow realization that they had been missing something fundamental. Above them, in orbit, their instructor was recording everything with increasing bewilderment. This was supposed to be a survival situation. There was supposed to be stress and difficulty and careful resource management. Instead, one of his cadets had turned a disaster scenario into what appeared to be a pleasant riverside camping trip. So Thuprex said eventually, cleaning his tentacles with his tongue equivalent, "What do we do for the rest of the 3 days?" Marcus leaned back against a tree, looking comfortable. "I was thinking we could build a shelter, maybe do some more fishing, purify some drinking water, the old-fashioned way. I saw some clay deposits upstream. We could make some basic containers. Oh, and there's probably some edible mushrooms in the forest. Could make a nice stew tomorrow." "You're treating this like a vacation," Vixril said, but she didn't sound disapproving anymore. She sounded almost wistful. "Well, yeah, we're on a nice planet with everything we need. No deadlines, no responsibilities, just 3 days of camping. That's not a survival situation. That's a break." Marcus poked at the fire with a stick. "You guys are so worried about surviving with your equipment that you forgot your ancestors survived without any of it. They didn't have nutri-packs or water purifiers or thermal regulators, and they did fine. Better than fine, actually, because they built civilizations that eventually invented all that stuff." Crixnach looked at his 70-page survival plan, soggy and muddy, and completely useless. Then he looked at the fire, the food, the river, the human who had solved their crisis in about 30 minutes, with nothing but a knife and basic knowledge. "The Academy is going to have questions," he said finally. "Probably," Marcus agreed. "But we're not dead. We're not hungry. And we're not panicking. I'd call that a pass." 3 days later, when the extraction shuttle arrived, the instructor found Team Verdant 7 living in a well-constructed shelter with a stone fire pit, clay water containers, a smoking rack for preserving fish, and what appeared to be a small garden of transplanted edible plants. The alien cadets looked healthier than most exam participants and significantly happier. They were also engaged in what the instructor's scanner identified as singing, though why anyone would voluntarily produce rhythmic vocalizations was beyond his understanding. Marcus had taught them campfire songs, because of course he had. The instructor's report was a masterpiece of bureaucratic confusion. Team Verdant 7 had technically violated approximately 47 safety protocols, ignored most of the survival curriculum, and abandoned all standard procedures. They had also survived comfortably for 3 days, learned valuable practical skills, and demonstrated actual adaptation to their environment, rather than just following a checklist. The human had introduced primitive combustion-based food preparation to 3 species who had never considered that cooking could be anything other than inputting commands into a nutri-processor. The Academy board debated for 6 hours about whether this constituted a pass or a fail. Eventually they settled on a pass with an asterisk and a note that said, "Unorthodox but effective. Please never do this again." They also quietly added an elective to the curriculum called Historical Survival Techniques, though they refused to admit it had anything to do with one extremely smug human cadet. Crixnach, Vixril, and Thuprex all signed up immediately. So did 40% of the next incoming class. Turns out, when you've eaten reconstituted protein paste your entire life, and then someone shows you that food can actually taste good, you get interested in learning more. The waiting list for the course stretched for 3 semesters. Marcus Chen graduated with the highest marks in his class and an official commendation for creative problem solving. He also received an unofficial reprimand for excessive unauthorized fire use and introducing cultural contamination into the survival examination process. He framed both and hung them on his wall. The real irony, of course, was that the entire galactic community had spent thousands of years developing increasingly sophisticated technology to survive on planets, while humans had simply never stopped learning how to do it the hard way. They had invented faster-than-light travel and still went camping for fun. They had artificial gravity and still climbed mountains. They had matter replicators and still argued passionately about the best way to cook a steak. The galaxy had optimized away all the inefficiencies, and in doing so had optimized away the knowledge of how to not die if the technology failed. Humans had kept the backup files, all of them, even the ones about starting fires with rocks and catching fish with their hands and identifying which plants would kill you versus which ones would just make you regret your choices for a few hours. Somewhere on Verdis 7, a fire pit made of riverstones sat cold beside a flowing river, waiting for the next group of panicked aliens who needed to remember that their ancestors survived just fine without a scanner to tell them what to do. Next to it, scratched into a flat rock, were the words Marcus had carved on their last day: technology fails, knowledge endures. Also, fish tastes better over fire. The Academy would eventually send teams to study the site. They would write papers about primitive survival techniques and their application in modern emergency scenarios. They would debate the philosophical implications of technological dependency versus practical knowledge. They would hold conferences and symposiums and produce very serious academic journals about the human approach to environmental adaptation. But none of them, not a single one, would taste food as good as what Marcus made that day by a river with nothing but a knife, some rocks, and the accumulated wisdom of a species that never forgot how to survive. The galaxy could keep its nutri-packs. Humans would keep their fires.